The marketplace was bustling with energy, a chaotic mix of alien races from across the galaxy, each selling goods or slaves under the cold, harsh light of neon signs. Captain Daniel Carter stepped off the transport shuttle, the smell of alien spices and metal lingering in the air as his boots hit the ground. He was a battle-hardened soldier from Earth, used to the blood and grit of war. But this was different. He had been sent here to buy supplies for his unit, not to get involved in the world of slavery. His mission was clear: gather weapons, fuel, and tech for his people. The Galactic Empire had been cracking down on human colonies, and every day they were forced to fight a losing battle against technologically superior forces. But as Daniel made his way through the market, he found himself drawn toward an area he hadn't planned to visit: a slave auction. He tried to ignore it, telling himself it was none of his business, but something in the air pulled him in. The auctioneer's voice boomed out, selling various alien species, each one more helpless and broken than the last. Daniel's eyes scanned the crowd, moving past the caged creatures and enslaved aliens. His mission was about survival, not compassion. But then he saw her. Lyra. She stood in the middle of the stage, her tall, slender frame almost glowing under the harsh lights. Her skin shimmered a deep, unnatural blue, like the depths of an ocean, her eyes gleaming a striking silver that felt like they could see right through him. She had the look of someone who had seen too much, someone whose spirit had been crushed yet still managed to fight to survive. Her face was composed, expressionless, but her eyes, they told a different story. The auctioneer was speaking, but Daniel couldn't hear his words. His attention was entirely on Lyra. Despite being surrounded by other slaves, she stood apart, her presence commanding, like she wasn't meant to be here. There was something in the way she held herself, defiant yet resigned, that made Daniel uneasy. He couldn't explain it, but he felt a pull toward her. She wasn't like the others, broken and defeated. She had a strength in her that was undeniable. "Step up, buyers. This one here is Lyra," the auctioneer announced. "A fighter, a warrior, but she has been broken. Bought by many, but none have tamed her. A danger to anyone who dares to take her on. Only the bravest will dare to take this one. Brave or foolish?" The thought crossed Daniel's mind, but he couldn't tear his eyes away from her. Lyra seemed to meet his gaze directly. For a fleeting moment, it almost felt like she was looking at him with a strange mix of curiosity and caution. It was as if she recognized something in him, something beyond the uniform, beyond the badge of the human military. "Sold to Captain Daniel Carter," the auctioneer cried out, and Daniel snapped back to reality. His hand was already raised, the credit chips for the transaction ready to be transferred. He didn't even know why he had done it. Maybe it was the fact that she wasn't like the others, too proud, too strong to be owned. Or maybe it was something else entirely. But when he saw that look in her eyes, the one that seemed to speak directly to him, he knew he couldn't leave without her. Lyra was brought down from the stage, her movements slow but purposeful, as if she had already resigned herself to whatever fate awaited her. She didn't fight as the guards shackled her wrists and led her toward Daniel. The crowd murmured, some of them in shock, some in amusement. Slaves were a common commodity in these parts, but Lyra was different. She wasn't just any slave, she was a warrior. When she was finally standing before him, Daniel could feel the weight of her presence. She was taller than most humans, her long blue hair cascading down her back like liquid midnight. Her armor, battered and worn, clung to her body, telling stories of countless battles fought and survived. She didn't speak, just stood there, her eyes staring straight ahead, never making eye contact. "Your new property, sir," one of the guards said, pushing her toward Daniel. But there was something in the way the guard spoke, like he was unsure if Lyra was truly property or something else entirely. Daniel didn't say anything. He simply motioned for her to follow him as he turned and walked away. She obeyed without hesitation, her steps silent but steady. As they walked through the marketplace, Daniel couldn't help but notice that people moved out of their way, staring at Lyra as though they feared her. She was dangerous. He knew that, but there was something else. A mystery. What had made her this way? Why wasn't she like the others, meek and submissive? He couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of something far bigger than either of them could have imagined. When they reached his ship, Lyra stood silently beside him, her posture straight. But her eyes, those eyes, kept flicking toward him every now and then, almost as if she was trying to gauge him, to figure him out. He could see the conflict there, the quiet struggle behind her calm exterior. She wasn't just a slave. She was a woman with a past, a story, and Daniel wanted to know it. But for now, he didn't speak. There was no need to rush things. He had a feeling that, just like the rest of this strange galaxy, Lyra's story would unfold in its own time. What he didn't know was how much her story would change his own, how much she would come to mean to him, and how, in time, they would be forced to make decisions that would alter the course of their lives forever. But all of that was still hidden in the shadows, waiting to be uncovered. As the ship's engines roared to life, and the planet below faded into the distance, Daniel stood at the control deck, eyes fixed on the star-filled void ahead. His mind was far from the mission. Instead, it lingered on the mysterious alien woman standing silently beside him. Lyra's presence was a constant reminder that he had just made a decision that could change everything. She was a slave, bought in an auction, but there was something about her that didn't fit the mold. Her strength, her defiance, it was unlike anything Daniel had seen before. The silence between them was heavy, almost suffocating. Lyra didn't speak, didn't ask for anything, and didn't acknowledge him unless absolutely necessary. She was there, but she wasn't really there. Her eyes, however, told a different story. They were always watching, always calculating, even when she wasn't looking directly at him. It made Daniel uneasy, yet he couldn't help but be intrigued. There was a quiet fire inside her that refused to be snuffed out, no matter what had been done to her. The first few days on the ship were tense. Daniel tried to keep his distance. He was a soldier, a leader, and his duty was to his crew and his mission, not to any complicated emotions that might arise from having a captive alien woman on board. Lyra, for her part, kept to herself, doing only what was necessary. She cleaned the weapons storage, maintained some of the ship's machinery, and followed orders without question. But she wasn't like the others, who performed their duties with an air of subservience. Lyra moved with a kind of quiet resistance, as though she was doing these tasks not because she had to, but because she chose to, for now. Despite her apparent calm, Daniel noticed little things. She would glance at him in the corner of her eye, almost as if she were testing him. Sometimes, when she thought he wasn't looking, there was a brief moment of vulnerability that flashed across her face, something that felt almost human. But whenever Daniel tried to approach her or engage in conversation, she shut down, her walls going back up. One day, as the ship cruised through the empty stretches of space, a sudden alarm blared throughout the ship. The lights flickered, and the ship's systems malfunctioned. Daniel rushed to the control panel, quickly assessing the situation. A distress signal. An enemy ship had intercepted them. "Battle stations," he shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. The crew scrambled, readying weapons and preparing for an attack. Daniel turned to Lyra, who was standing nearby, watching him intently. "Stay here," he ordered, though something in his voice seemed to soften. He didn't know why, but he didn't want her in harm's way. She had no reason to fight for him, but still, a part of him wanted to protect her. Lyra didn't respond immediately. She just stared at him with those unreadable eyes. For a moment, Daniel thought she might refuse, might rebel, but then, without a word, she moved toward the armory. "You think you can fight?" Daniel asked, almost surprised. "I can fight," she said simply, her voice low and steady. "I am not helpless." Daniel stared at her, unsure whether he should stop her or not. But something in the way she spoke told him that if he tried, it would only make things worse. So he nodded. "If you're going to help, stay close. And don't do anything stupid," he said, his tone gruff. As they prepared for the attack, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that this situation was different. Lyra wasn't like the other prisoners or slaves he had seen in his time. She was not some helpless victim. She was a warrior, just as capable as he was. If anything, he might need her help more than she needed his. But there was no time to ponder this. The enemy ship was drawing closer, and the sounds of weapons charging echoed throughout the ship. The enemy fighters came out of nowhere, fast, sleek ships that seemed to materialize out of the darkness of space. They attacked without warning, their energy weapons lighting up the void. Daniel and the crew fought back fiercely, returning fire as they tried to maneuver the ship into a more defensive position. In the heat of the battle, with energy blasts flying all around them, Daniel's mind was focused on one thing: survival. The rest was secondary. But as he glanced over at Lyra, crouched behind cover with a blaster rifle in hand, a surprising realization hit him. She wasn't just holding the weapon. She was using it with deadly precision, picking off enemy ships one by one. It was clear that her training wasn't just for show. She was skilled. As the battle raged on, Daniel found himself relying on Lyra more and more. She knew tactics, how to fight, how to think strategically. She was as much a part of the crew now as anyone else. Yet despite her help, there was still an underlying tension between them. She wasn't a comrade. She was a slave, his slave, bought and paid for. There was an unspoken understanding that no matter how much they fought side by side, there would always be a wall between them. The battle finally ended, but not without casualties. One of the crew members had been hit by an enemy blast, and despite their best efforts, he didn't make it. The ship was damaged, and repairs would take time. In the aftermath, Daniel stood alone in the control room, his thoughts swirling. He had been in countless battles, but something about this one felt different. His mind kept returning to Lyra, to her bravery, to her fierce determination to survive. She wasn't like anyone else he had met before. Lyra entered the room, her face expressionless as always, but Daniel noticed something in her eyes, something that hadn't been there before. A shift. It was subtle, but it was there. She had fought for him, and for the first time, he could see the beginning of a bond forming between them. She wasn't just a slave anymore. She was more. As she approached, Lyra spoke, her voice quiet but firm. "You'll need me," she said simply. Daniel looked at her, feeling a strange mixture of frustration and admiration. "I never asked for you to help," he replied, his voice colder than he intended. "I know," she said, and for the first time, Daniel saw a flicker of something softer in her eyes. "But you do need me, whether you admit it or not." There was a long silence between them, and in that silence, something began to change. The uneasy alliance between them was forming into something more, something neither of them fully understood yet. Neither of them had asked for it, but it was happening all the same. The days following the intense battle were filled with a strange, uneasy calm. The ship drifted through the stars, its crew working to repair the damage from the enemy attack. Captain Daniel Carter stood on the bridge, watching the vast emptiness of space unfold before him. The silence felt like a heavy blanket, smothering everything. Yet, in the back of his mind, he couldn't shake the events of the past few days, especially what had happened with Lyra. He had always thought of the alien woman as a slave, someone he had bought out of necessity, someone to be used as he saw fit. But now, he wasn't so sure anymore. She had proven herself in battle, not just as a fighter, but as someone capable of holding her own. Daniel couldn't deny the truth. Lyra was a warrior, and her skills were unmatched. Yet, something about her remained a mystery. There was something more to her, something that she wasn't sharing. It wasn't just her fighting skills that puzzled him. It was the way she carried herself. Despite her alien appearance, there was an undeniable humanity in her eyes. She wasn't like the others he had encountered. She wasn't broken. She wasn't afraid. Instead, there was a fire in her, something Daniel couldn't quite grasp. And the more he thought about it, the more he realized that he didn't know who Lyra really was. That night, as the crew gathered for a brief rest period, Daniel made a decision. He needed answers. It had been long enough. He couldn't keep ignoring the questions that had been gnawing at him. He needed to know why Lyra had been so calm during the battle, why she had fought so fiercely. He needed to know who she truly was. He found her in the mess hall, sitting alone at a table, eating her meal in silence. As usual, she didn't look at him as he approached, her attention focused entirely on the food in front of her. But Daniel wasn't about to let that stop him. "You," he said, his voice firm. "We need to talk." Lyra didn't respond immediately. Instead, she took a slow breath, her eyes briefly flicking up to meet his. There was something in her gaze, something that hinted at a deeper understanding, a kind of weariness that Daniel couldn't place. "I'm not here to fight," she finally said, her voice quiet but resolute. "What do you want?" "I want to know what you're hiding," Daniel replied bluntly. "You've been acting strange. You're not like the others. You fought like you've been trained, like you've done it before. So tell me, Lyra, who are you really?" For a long moment, there was silence between them. Lyra didn't respond right away, her fingers playing with the edges of her meal. Daniel could feel the weight of her gaze on him, but she didn't speak. The tension in the air grew thick. And for a moment, Daniel thought she might just walk away. But then, unexpectedly, she spoke. "You really don't know, do you?" Lyra said softly, her words catching Daniel off guard. "You think I'm just another slave, another alien to be controlled. But I'm not." Daniel leaned in, his curiosity piqued. "Then what are you?" Lyra's eyes flickered with something, regret, perhaps, or something deeper, darker. She set her food aside and looked at him, her expression unreadable. "I'm not from a place like this," she began, her voice steady. "I wasn't born to serve. I wasn't meant to be a slave. My people were once powerful, and we fought wars just like the ones you're fighting now. But we were betrayed by our own kind, by those who wanted to see us fall. And so, we were scattered, hunted." Daniel's brow furrowed. He had heard stories of the powerful alien factions that once roamed the galaxy, but he hadn't known about Lyra's people. He hadn't known that her kind had been broken by betrayal, that they had been torn apart by their own. It was a truth that resonated deeply with him. He had seen what betrayal could do to people, what it could do to soldiers. And now he understood why Lyra had been so different. "I've fought," Lyra continued, her voice low but fierce. "I've fought for survival. I've fought for my people. And when I was captured, when they sold me at that auction, I didn't know if I could trust anyone ever again." Her eyes locked with his. "But you're different. You saved me. You didn't treat me like the others." Daniel took in her words, a mixture of disbelief and empathy swirling within him. She wasn't just a slave. She was a survivor, a fighter. And somehow, he had been caught in the middle of something much bigger than himself. He had brought her aboard his ship, and now he was learning the truth. She had her own story, her own struggles, her own secrets. "Why didn't you tell me this sooner?" Daniel asked, his voice softening. Lyra hesitated. "I didn't know if I could trust you. I didn't know if you would understand. But I see now that you might be the only one who could." The realization hit Daniel hard. He had been treating her like an object, like property to be used. He had underestimated her, thought that she was nothing more than a tool to help him fight. But she was much more than that. She had lived through things he couldn't imagine. She had fought battles he couldn't comprehend. And now she was here, standing by his side, fighting with him. "I'm sorry," Daniel said, his voice full of sincerity. "I didn't know. I should have known. But I can promise you one thing. I won't treat you like that again. You're not just a slave. You're a person, and I'll respect that." Lyra didn't say anything at first, but after a moment, she nodded slowly. There was something in her eyes, a flicker of trust, perhaps, or a willingness to see what might come next. "We're in this together now," she said, her voice quiet but strong. "And we'll face whatever comes, side by side." In that moment, something shifted between them. The walls that had once separated them, captor and captive, began to crumble. They were no longer two strangers thrown together by fate. They were allies, bound by a common goal, and perhaps in time, something more. The bond between them had only just begun to form, and what came next would depend on how they navigated the path ahead. But whatever that future held, Daniel knew one thing for certain. Lyra was no longer just a mystery. She was someone he could count on. And together, they would fight, not just for survival, but for something greater. Days turned into weeks as Captain Daniel Carter and Lyra worked together, fighting back against the forces that threatened them. The bond between them grew stronger with every battle, every conversation, every shared look. Yet despite everything, there remained an invisible distance between them, a distance that neither of them could quite explain. There were moments when Daniel caught himself staring at Lyra, trying to understand her, but every time he thought he might figure her out, she slipped away into her thoughts, hiding something deep inside. The war raged on, but the real battle for Daniel wasn't with the alien forces that were constantly closing in on their position. It was with the feelings he had started to develop for Lyra. It was complicated, more complicated than he had ever imagined. She was his ally, his soldier, his equal in the fight, but she was also a prisoner, a slave he had once bought, and now shared a strange, uneasy bond with. Could there be more to their relationship? Could they ever be more than this? It was late one evening when Daniel found himself pacing the quiet halls of the ship, unable to sleep. He had been lost in thought, replaying the events of the past weeks over and over again, when he heard the faint sound of footsteps behind him. He turned around to see Lyra walking toward him, her face expressionless as usual, but something in her eyes told him that she was different tonight. There was a storm brewing in her gaze, something unsettled, something raw. "Can we talk?" Lyra's voice was soft, almost hesitant, but there was an edge to it that made Daniel's heart skip a beat. She wasn't the type to ask for conversations like this, and that immediately piqued his interest. "Of course," Daniel replied, his voice steady, though inside a storm of his own was starting to build. He followed her to a quieter section of the ship, away from the crew and the noise of the engine. The silence around them seemed to amplify the tension between them, and Daniel couldn't help but feel that something was about to change, something he wasn't prepared for. Lyra stopped in front of a small window, her back to him as she stared out into the endless void of space. "You don't understand, do you?" she said, her voice barely above a whisper. How could you? How could you ever understand what it's like to be someone like me?" Daniel took a cautious step forward, trying to find the right words. "I don't, Lyra. I'll never fully understand, but I want to try. I want to know what's going on in your head. You've been distant for weeks now, and it's killing me. Please, tell me what's wrong." For a long time, Lyra didn't answer. The only sound was the hum of the ship's systems in the background, but even that seemed to fade as Daniel waited for her to speak. Finally, she turned to face him, her eyes dark with something Daniel couldn't quite place. "You saved me," she began, her voice trembling with emotion for the first time. "You didn't have to. You could have left me there, to rot with the others. But you didn't. You brought me aboard your ship. You treated me like a person, not a slave. And for that, I owe you everything. But there's something I need to tell you." Daniel stepped closer, his heart pounding in his chest. He could feel the weight of her words hanging in the air, thick with meaning. "What is it, Lyra?" She took a deep breath, as if preparing herself for something difficult. "When I was captured, I lost everything. My family, my home, my dignity. I was nothing more than a possession, to be bought and sold like a piece of property. And when I was brought here, I thought I would just be another tool in your war, another alien to be used. But then something happened. You happened." Daniel didn't say anything, but he felt a knot tighten in his stomach. This was something deeper than he had imagined, something much more profound than the strange connection they had built through battle. He wasn't sure he was ready to hear what she had to say, but he knew that this moment would change everything. I tried to keep my distance, Lyra continued, her voice low but steady. I tried to push you away. I didn't want to feel anything for you. I didn't want to care. But you made it impossible. You made me feel safe. You made me feel human again. And somewhere along the way, I started to care about you. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. He had known something was changing between them, but hearing her say it out loud shook him to his core. This wasn't just some passing emotion. This wasn't just the heat of the moment or the adrenaline of battle. This was real. Lyra, he began, but his voice faltered. He didn't know what to say. He hadn't expected this, not like this, not now. But the truth was undeniable. He had started to care about her too, more than he ever thought possible. I never wanted to fall for you, Lyra whispered, her eyes searching his for understanding. But I did. And now, I don't know what to do with it. I don't know what this means for us. For you, for me. Daniel felt a surge of emotions flood through him. Confusion, fear, desire, and something much deeper. He had been in control of his mission, of his decisions, his battles. But now, standing before Lyra, he realized he had no control over his feelings. They were raw, they were real, and they were frightening. I don't know either, Daniel admitted, his voice low. But I want to figure it out, together. I know it's complicated, Lyra. We're from different worlds, with different histories. But what I do know is that I don't want to go through this without you. I can't. Lyra's eyes softened as she stepped closer to him, her hand trembling as it reached out to touch his arm. There was vulnerability in her touch, something Daniel hadn't seen before. I didn't think you'd say that, she said quietly. But I'm glad you did. In that moment, the walls between them crumbled completely. They weren't just captain and slave anymore. They were two people, two souls, connected by something much stronger than the war around them. Their bond was no longer just about survival. It was about something deeper, something more meaningful. And together, they would face whatever came next. The war was far from over, but the battles had shifted. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about something bigger. Daniel and Lyra had formed an unexpected alliance, one that had begun to shape the very course of the war. But as their bond grew, so did the risks. The stakes were higher now, with every decision they made echoing through the ranks of both the human forces and the alien invaders. There were whispers among the soldiers, rumors of a rebellion brewing under the surface. The galaxy was changing, and people were starting to believe that it wasn't just the aliens who could win this war. It was the humans, with the right leadership. Daniel's leadership had been crucial in pushing back the alien forces, but it was becoming clear that the future of the war rested on more than just battle tactics. The human soldiers had fought hard, driven by the hope that they could stop the AI-controlled alien empire from enslaving them. Now, with Lyra's insights and their growing trust, they saw the potential for a revolution, one that didn't just fight for survival, but for something more profound: freedom. One evening, as Daniel walked through the corridors of their secret base, he was met with the kind of look he knew all too well: determined, fierce, and full of purpose. It was one of the soldiers, an older man named Sergeant Hale. Hale had been with Daniel since the beginning of the war, a veteran who had seen the worst of what the galaxy had to offer. The man had witnessed countless battles, lost comrades, and watched as entire cities were wiped out by the aliens. But in his eyes now was something different: a fire. "Sir, we need to talk," Hale said, his voice low and urgent. Daniel knew that tone. It was the voice of a man who knew something important, something that could change the course of the war. "What is it, Hale?" Daniel asked, stepping aside to allow the man to speak privately. "There's word going around the ranks," Hale began, glancing around as if to make sure no one was listening. "The soldiers, The ones who have been under your command. They're starting to talk. They believe in you, sir. They believe in the cause. But there's something more. Daniel raised an eyebrow, unsure of where this was going. What are you saying, Sergeant? They want a rebellion, Hale said bluntly. They want to fight back against the alien empire in a way we've never done before. They're tired of being pushed around, tired of living under the shadow of the AI and the alien conquerors. They want more than just survival. They want freedom, and they want it now. Daniel felt a chill run down his spine. A rebellion. He had heard rumors, of course, but hearing them from someone like Hale, someone who had seen it all, made it all too real. The thought of leading a rebellion, of leading a revolution, was a heavy burden. But as he thought about it, he realized it was the only way forward. The only way to truly defeat the aliens was to show them that humans weren't just fighting to survive. They were fighting for their very existence, for their right to determine their own fate. How serious are they? Daniel asked, his mind already racing with possibilities. They're serious enough to die for it, Hale replied without hesitation. They trust you, Captain. They'll follow you. But it's not just about the soldiers anymore. The whole galaxy's watching. We can't just win a battle. We have to make the whole galaxy believe that humanity won't fall. Daniel stood still for a moment, processing everything Hale had said. He had known this was coming. He had known that the human spirit couldn't be crushed forever, that eventually they would rise. But to leave them in a rebellion? It was terrifying, daunting, and yet, somehow, it felt like the only choice. He looked Hale in the eye and made a decision. Then we start preparing, Daniel said firmly. We make sure every human who's been oppressed by these aliens knows that we're fighting for them. We'll gather the soldiers, the rebels, anyone who wants to be part of this cause, but we'll do it carefully. One wrong move, and everything we've worked for could be lost. I won't let that happen. Hale nodded. We'll spread the word. The soldiers will rally behind you. It's time to make our move, Captain. As Daniel walked away from the conversation, his heart was heavy with the weight of the decision he had just made. This wasn't just another battle. This was the beginning of something monumental. The rebellion had begun, but the question was, would they be able to carry it through to the end? In the days that followed, Daniel and Lyra worked together, preparing the human forces for what was to come. They knew that they couldn't win this war on their own. They needed allies, new allies, allies who had been oppressed by the alien empire for far too long. Every planet, every station, every corner of the galaxy had been touched by the reach of the AI-controlled aliens. But now, it was time for the oppressed to rise up. It was time for the rebellion to take shape. Lyra, despite her past as a slave, was a key figure in the movement. Her knowledge of the alien empire, of their tactics, of their weaknesses, was invaluable. She became a voice for the oppressed, someone who could speak with authority not just as a fighter, but as someone who had lived through the horrors the rebellion sought to overcome. One night, after a particularly intense strategy session, Lyra and Daniel sat together in a quiet corner of the ship, the weight of the rebellion hanging heavily in the air between them. I never imagined this, Lyra said softly, her voice filled with a mix of awe and disbelief. I never thought I would be part of something like this. Something so big, something so important. Daniel turned to her, a serious expression on his face. Neither did I. But here we are, and we're going to change the galaxy. Together. Lyra nodded, her eyes filled with determination. They had come a long way from the days when she had been his slave, when they had only been allies out of necessity. Now they were something more, partners in a fight for freedom. And though the rebellion was just beginning, they both knew one thing for sure. They would stop at nothing to see it succeed. The battle had raged on for weeks. The rebellion had gained momentum, and the galaxy was on the brink of a new era. Daniel, Lyra, and the rest of their forces had fought with all their might, pushing the AI-controlled aliens back with every ounce of strength they had. It wasn't just about fighting anymore. It was about survival, freedom, and the very future of humanity. As the final battle loomed on the horizon, the stakes were higher than ever before. The last push was coming, and Daniel knew this would determine the fate of their world, their galaxy, and everything they had fought for. The space station where the final showdown was set to take place was massive. It hovered in the orbit of a dying star, its dark, metal surface reflecting the cold, harsh light from above. This was the heart of the alien empire, the place where the AI overlords controlled the destiny of billions. It was here that the final battle would unfold. It was a place of power, but also one of desperation, as the aliens knew that if they lost this battle, their empire would crumble. Daniel stood at the helm of the human forces, watching as his soldiers prepared for the final strike. Their faces were a mix of determination and fear, but there was no turning back. Every soldier knew that this would be their last chance. If they succeeded, they would free humanity from the AI's grip. If they failed, they would be crushed under the weight of the alien empire's power. Beside him stood Lyra. She had come so far from the days when she was a slave to the aliens, now a trusted leader in the rebellion. Her intelligence, strength, and fierce loyalty had made her an indispensable ally. They had fought side by side, and now, as the final battle approached, they both knew this could be their last fight. But there was no fear in their eyes, only resolve. "We've come a long way, Lyra," Daniel said, his voice steady but heavy with the weight of what was about to happen. "I never imagined we'd make it this far, but here we are, ready to take on the enemy one last time." Lyra nodded, her eyes fixed on the approaching enemy fleet. "We didn't just come this far to lose. This is our chance to change everything." Daniel's heart raced as he turned his gaze toward the stars. It was surreal to think about how much had changed in such a short amount of time. What started as a desperate struggle for survival had become a full-fledged rebellion. The war had taken so much, so many lives had been lost, so many battles fought, but it had also brought them to this point, a moment where they could finally make a choice. The alien forces were ruthless, and Daniel knew they would stop at nothing to retain control of the galaxy. But this time, humanity was no longer the underdog. This time, they had the knowledge, the strategy, and the heart to fight back. And they weren't alone. The rebellion had grown beyond just soldiers. It had become a movement. People from all corners of the galaxy, from different species and races, had joined the fight. The AI's control had started to crumble, and the rebellion was the spark that would set the galaxy on fire. As they prepared for the final assault, Daniel and Lyra shared a quiet moment together, knowing that this could be the last time they saw each other alive. There was no room for hesitation. The rebellion had reached its climax, and this was their moment to strike. "I want you to know, Daniel," Lyra said, her voice barely above a whisper. "No matter what happens, I'm glad I fought by your side. You gave me a chance to be more than just a slave. You gave me a purpose." Daniel reached out, placing a hand on her shoulder. "I couldn't have done any of this without you. You were my strength when I had none. We're in this together." The final countdown began, and the rebels launched their assault on the alien station. The battle was fierce. Ships clashed in space, sending shockwaves through the cold expanse. Laser fire lit up the darkness as both sides fought with everything they had left. But the humans had the advantage now. They had the knowledge of the AI's weaknesses, and they used it to their advantage. Their ships, smaller and more agile, darted through the alien defenses with precision. On the ground, soldiers clashed in brutal hand-to-hand combat, their weapons flashing in the dim light of the station's interior. Daniel fought alongside his men, leading them into the heart of the enemy's fortress. Each step brought them closer to the control center, where the fate of the galaxy would be decided. But just as victory seemed within their grasp, the unexpected happened. The alien AI, desperate to protect its empire, triggered a self-destruct sequence that could annihilate the entire station. The countdown began, and the pressure mounted. Daniel knew they had mere minutes to stop it. In that moment, Lyra made a decision that would change everything. She pushed forward, determined to be the one to end the AI's reign once and for all. With her sharp mind and intimate knowledge of the alien systems, she raced toward the control room. She knew this was her moment, the moment she had been waiting for her whole life. "Daniel," Lyra called as she ran, "I can end this, but you need to keep them busy while I do it." Daniel nodded without hesitation. He knew what she had to do. The two of them had become more than just allies. They were family now. And he would do whatever it took to make sure she had the chance to finish what they had started. The final moments were a blur. As Lyra hacked into the control systems, Daniel and his soldiers held off the alien forces with everything they had. Every second felt like an eternity. The station trembled as the countdown neared its end, and the tension was unbearable. But just as the countdown reached its final seconds, Lyra succeeded. The AI's self-destruct sequence was halted, and the station's systems collapsed. The rebellion had won. The battle was over. The galaxy had been saved. But the cost was high. Many lives were lost, and the scars of war would take time to heal. Yet in the end, the choice they had made, to fight for freedom, to rise above the oppression of the alien empire, had been the right one. The rebellion had succeeded, and humanity had taken its place as a force to be reckoned with in the galaxy. Daniel and Lyra stood together, watching as the once mighty alien empire crumbled. The galaxy was free, and they had won. But as they looked to the stars, they knew that this was just the beginning. The future was theirs to shape, and with their courage, their bond, and their determination, they would rebuild a galaxy where everyone could live free.